during my journey into politics, I've come across and got to know some incredible people, and those folks actually helped me during my campaign and are what I would consider to be real great citizens, not only of the state of Vermont, but also of the United States. And they stand firmly with me in a number of areas that we all agree on, the Constitution, and quite frankly, just being upright, straight shooting citizens of the country to let people know what's going on. And one of the things that I think is very important that we pay attention to, and I know I see a lot of familiar faces there, but we need to make sure that we stay united in what we're trying to do here and get the younger people out to vote and get the younger people away from believing what they're reading and believing the propaganda is being pushed out there by the media and social media sites as well. One of the folks that I would say that is a forefront leader in that is the gentleman responsible for putting this event together and to bring in a nationally recognized gentleman that can help us understand what's going on with this critical race theory and a number of other things that are taking place across the country. And I think we'll all leave here today better educated as to what the focus is of certain particular groups and how we should address that. I will, in closing, before I make the introduction of the person responsible for making this happen today, I'd just like to point out that there are baskets around for contributions, and I would ask that if you can afford to do so, make a contribution. The one thing that I found very early on in running for the office of state senator was that it's very expensive to do this stuff. And I had a lot of great people that put forth, contributions to help me do it. And but it's a very important thing. And unfortunately, I think people in our position are not as well financed and equipped to get money into our coffers that some of our opponents are. So with that, I'll make the introduction of the gentleman who's responsible for making this happen today. Thank you for having the interest of showing up here to educate yourself as to what's really going on behind the scenes and what you need to know. And I would strongly encourage you when you leave here today, whatever you take from this speaker, whatever you take from this event today, make sure that you communicate that information to people that need to know. And when I say that, we're talking about critical race theory. Make sure you communicate that to your children, to your grandchildren, or anyone else that may be susceptible to some of the things that are taking place. And I have no idea what this gentleman's going to tell us today, but I do know that what he's going to tell us is the truth from his perspective. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce John Clark. John is a former candidate for state governor. I came acquainted with John. He actually kind of recruited me to be involved in the Senate race last year, and he's an incredible speaker. He's an incredibly knowledgeable man with an incredible sense of humor. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce John Clark.
Thank you very much, Chief. Well, with all those accolades, I'm ready to crawl on the table. I think we should thank Carol DuPont for putting this together, too. So, at our events, we do like to acknowledge our American flag, which lately seems to be a controversial thing, even in our Olympics. So, if you could all please stand, whatever your party affiliation, and join us together to recognize our representation of our rights and our liberties.
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I think that's a great place to start, and I think that K. Carl Smith is going to be talking about that. I believe. We'll see. I'm very excited to bring such an experienced and committed speaker here to Vermont, and yes, we do need the money. I've been collecting money now for about 8 months with the Vermont Liberty Network so that we could do this. And we're hoping to leverage it into more events and more speakers and more discussions, okay, so that we can, this is about a discussion. And when Mike talks about people running for office, it's something that we really need to emphasize. It's about ideas. And I think next year particularly, frankly, if you're a Blue Dog Democrat and you support the First Amendment and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the 14th Amendment and all the things that this flag represents and that Kate Carl's going to talk about, then you're my Democrat. Does that make sense? Can I get an amen? All right, because these are the values that used to bring everybody together. And in the 60s and 70s, it was the Democrats who were leading the liberal force in this country to do what? Protect the rights of the KKK and Nazis to speak. Brandenburg versus Ohio. These are seminal cases. And now, if I invoke those cases, I'm somehow an extremist. I mean, it's their stuff, right? No, it's all of our stuff. So speaking of stuff, I like props. If you haven't, Vermont Liberty Network is also about fiscal integrity in our government representation. This is a Vermont Liberty t-shirt, one of our various. This is a tick sucking the blood out of the bloated dome. And that squirt bottle, that's you guys. And again, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, do we not want to have balanced budgets and our pensions paid and other promises kept? These are bizarre ideas, I guess, in a time of printing money. What I want to do before I introduce K. Carl is kind of soften him up. First of all, I want to speak really well, so I put him on his game, He's like Led Zeppelin, and I'm like some little local band. We're gonna have fun. This is our other one of our mottos. We think Vermont should have a proud motto. So this is Vermont Liberty Maple Syrup. Nothing sweeter than Vermont Liberty. That's our motto. You might see it behind me. We had enough of some of the other characterizations of Vermonters. Again, whatever one's political persuasion. So we're trying to be positive about our culture and about the tradition, which is not perfect, but which we still aspire towards of our Constitution. And that's what we're talking about. So I have a speech. I'm going to try it out on you. Ready? We're talking more broadly about the Constitution. And we see the Constitution. I just heard that somebody said that they can compel you to take vaccines and compel you to not pay rent, and they don't care if it's constitutional or not. Anybody hear this? So guess what? I'm an attorney. I was very, very privileged to learn about the United States Constitution. I was really quite humbled. Even as a kid, praying or saluting to that thing, because there was a certain habitualness. I didn't really understand it, did I? Now I do. And as an attorney, I came to appreciate some of the profound exceptionalism of American law. And that's what K. Carl is going to talk about, but that's what's under attack now. So as we talk about critical race theory, I'm always going to come back to who was Frederick Douglass, who was Martin Luther King, why were they wrong? Were they wrong? Because this is the conversation that needs to be had. For 3 or 4 years, we've had BLM signs and this whole political ideology stuffed down our schools and our faces, being told that it's just about black people matter. And that's with little letters. Of course black people matter, especially Vermont. Vermont has a tremendous history of tolerance that's being turned right upside down right now. And I take great offense at that personally, because my family members for years were poor white people. They weren't making their money. They were making their money by subjugating cows, all right? And it was hand milked. And my great-grandfather lost an arm. Try hand milking that. He changed jobs, And my great-grandmother died in the Spanish flu. And my other grandmother and family are very much Abenakis and suffered prejudice. But the system was not prejudice. And the system we aspire towards is one of equality. So what I want to set K. Carl up for, this is a discussion about education. But the constitutional issues we're discussing are much more broadly. And his work with the Frederick Douglass Republicans, and I do hope you'll have some materials, if not, we can get them for you, of his book and other things, are just taking those traditional ideas and showing, look, they worked. So before we abandon them, show me what your replacement value system is. So I'm going to use a couple quotes here to show you that we are still part of a longer conversation about the importance of education in our society and the importance and centrality of the aspiration towards those ideals that are our American signpost, why they're still important. And this novel ideology, by the way, was concocted in progressive laboratories of academia. If you trace it, it all comes from Derek Bell and a few other writers in the 70s or 80s. I actually studied some of this stuff in the 80s. And even when I studied it then, it was like, well, it sounds great to create a utopia, but, we're humans. And so we have some tried and true ideas, and we're seeing now why this didn't work. These are the same academic circles that brought us the eugenics and lobotomy movements. Now, some people, if I say that, well, that's extremist, we're Nazism, okay? Think about all three. All three look at one issue that determines your lot in life. For the Nazis, it was your DNA. For the eugenics people, was it your DNA? For the lobotomy people, was it your DNA? In all those cases, they compromised the legal rights of other people to come up with some new progressive utopia. These ideas come from the same place. And the guy I like to use as my authority is Thomas Sowell. Now, if you haven't heard of Thomas Sowell, I lost the cover. I take them all off so I don't get stuff all over them. I'm a farmer. I like to write in them. Thomas Sowell wrote this book called Discrimination and Disparities. He's a black conservative economist, magna cum laude from Harvard. Why aren't we studying him in our schools instead of racist, race-baiting poets who call people to death with machetes? That's Radley Edmonds in the Essex School Board. Look at my articles. Go read what's being taught in these schools and how horrible it is, and recognize an experiment is being performed on our children and grandchildren right now before our eyes. Here's a really great authority. And what I'm finding is the people that are CRT proponents don't even know his name. If you read this book, you will be more equipped than 95% of the people in America to understand why it is that although racism exists, it is not the sole determinant of outcome in America. Okay? We happen to have had a president of a certain color who might not have been able to succeed had this been a white supremacist society. Hello? And Vermont voted for Obama at the highest rate in the country of all 50 states except Hawaii, but we're told we're a white supremacist society. All right, this is why I run over time. Somebody start timing me right now. No, really, I want to leave you at least 10 minutes, right? I drove 2.5 hours. It's direct. There's an equation. The farther I drive, the longer I have to. No, I apologize. Less is more. But all three of these ideas were newfangled science that had a particular popularity in Vermont, didn't they? We Vermonters, we know about lobotomies and eugenics, and we know when we see it, when it starts spreading hate instead of forgiveness. It starts lying about people. So here we are with critical race theory. Let me try to summarize it for you, because what I've been trying to find out of these events is how best to understand and convey to people what this is. It's complex, it's weird, you've got to read it. There are a lot of materials here, by the way. Please take them. There are references here to other articles and books. There are references in a letter for you to ask from your school board what materials are there. If I'm wrong and none of this is, I just want to teach Martin Luther King and Frederick Douglass. I'm cool with that. All right, so when people portray me and others as hard right-wing extremists, I'm not opposing affirmative action. I'm not opposing Bakke and the other existing legal decisions that control the law in America. I'm opposing a theory that wants to erase those laws. Everybody understand, this theory actually says that the First Amendment and the 14th Amendment were wrong because they're used by white people to oppress black people. And therefore, the only way to counter discrimination is to have government stop being colorblind and start discriminating against white people to balance the path to those past grievances. This is a disaster, okay? And it's based on some neuroscience that shows that people have some subconscious prejudices. Surprise, right? And there's a big body of science out there, a lot of reasons. It's not simple, but they've oversimplified it. Okay? And so the next leap is, therefore, every disparity between colors that exists in America is a consequence of white people being oppressive racists. That's a big leap. And the neuroscience shows that actually most people don't act on those suppressed urges, kind of like lust. You know, anybody ever stay married and stay loyal? Gosh, what a concept. Men, subconsciously, you know, if you're going to jump into imposing this on a theory and start experimenting on our kids, you darn well better have the science right. And they don't have the science right. They not only don't have the science to prove that these disparities are actually caused by discrimination, and I won't talk about it here, but look at my articles, they're lying about the numbers in Vermont. They're lying about the disparities. You know, the black people in Vermont have dropped $10,000 in their average income in the last 3 years, and we're told that's because of our white supremacy. I think it's because Rwandans and Somalis and others come to live here. You have 400 people come live here, and that whole number drops. But how about we just look at the real number and use the science of statistics? Calling all of our police racist because we're arresting more black people during a fentanyl epidemic who are coming here from New York City. Bennington probably never sees any drug traffic. But it comes from Springfield, Mass. and Hartford, Connecticut, where I practice as a criminal defense attorney. And that demographic is much more largely black and Hispanic than this one. So if you go, look, all of our police are racist because they're arresting black people without looking, because you're comparing the demographic of them to Vermonters by saying so. It's a crime to do this. It's an abuse of the science. And it upsets me, because people are being hurt both by a fentanyl crisis and by unwarranted claims of racism against anyone who dares disagree. What was done to the Bowen family in Putney, and has been done to my family and other people for daring to invoke Martin Luther King, is something I never thought I'd see happen in America. So, they're teaching this to our kids, and if anybody takes exception, that's white fragility. It's circuitous. It's a circular logic. You can't win. It's a race-based theory that cannot take critical analysis. That's why it's 3 years already implemented in your schools. This, to me, is the big question. Once we all get down to the bottom of how horrible this is and how untested it is, if you're going to test on my kids, you better have some evidence. Can I get an amen? I'm not preaching you. You're going to bring in something experimental on children about racism. You darn well had better have some science. They do not. And they are on the retreat. As they go, oh, who could ever question our desire to help black people? Well, we never did. But you question ours. You question our desire and our beliefs and treat us like dirt if we know that this works. Dr. Aaron Kinsvater, he is a UVM professor that has dared to stand up against us. He's a liberal. He has been attacked. He's leaving. He has been horribly attacked. Look at his videos. They don't want you to. He's a psychoanalyst. He explains how harmful it is to the human psyche to compel someone to believe something that they don't believe. Sound like a religion? Sound like a forced conversion? Because that's what it is. And by saying so, he's been attacked. He's saying it's horribly damaging to trained psychotherapists to compel people to admit their privilege and white before they can proceed to be accepted as a human being. If that's what they're going to do to children? He's talking about adults. Just get educated for yourselves. I hope I'm wrong. The more I've studied this, I know I'm not. Because it's an ideology. So, the theory says the U.S. Constitution, Frederick Douglass, Martin Luther King, all of them are wrong. They won't come out and say it. They're saying Martin Luther King, Frederick Douglass, or Uncle Tom's. I'd like to have that conversation. We did a year ago, didn't we? Okay, Carl, that's pretty the spot. We tried to meet a year ago, COVID came, so we did it by Zoom call. So we actually get to meet the flesh today. This whole thing is not based on science. It's based on politics. And they never actually proved what systemic racism is. All right? Governor Scott has gone along with calling us a systemically racist entity or society. Define that, please. The old definition was when you characterize people and treat them differently based on their skin color. The new definition is you're white and you're the majority. You with me? It's that simple. It sounds insane, so please look for yourselves. That's the new definition. If you're white, you're subconsciously racist. You have to acknowledge your privilege and all the benefits you got from it at the expense of others and give money back. I don't hear them claiming Uganda as a black supremacist country. This theory is garbage. It won't last long. Read it for yourselves. Here's some quotes for you. And Howard, who's keeping time? Can I go over?
What can I give you?
I don't know. 1 hour. 5 more minutes? Is that okay? I got some quotes. I think everything I teach, everything I do in this group is learn from people smarter than me. That's why I'm waving Tom so around. Because he's a gift. He's written over 50 books. Do you think I think that I know more about race and statistics than him? I don't. Why aren't our school teachers looking at him instead of some guy who moved here with his hack film poetry? The poetry of Graduate Edmonds should never be in a school. Read it for yourself. I can't even read it out loud. I got the book here. I play a game sometimes. I call it deck of playing cards. I ask somebody to open up a page of this book and I start reading. So I can't read the swears, I can't read the hate, I can't read what I'm reading. There's nothing positive in this book. This is being taught in schools in Vermont. It's all about hate. So, Martin Luther King said, the function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. Intelligence plus character. That is the goal of true education. You're not allowed to think critically about critical race theory, by the way. Shh. These teachers are not thinking critically. They won't even allow a critical question. What are they going to do to our children who raise their hand and go, wait a minute, I think I'm woke already. I don't need this training. You're not allowed to take exception to this ideology, because it should be in our schools or in our government. Martin Luther King, rarely do we find men who willingly engage in hard, solid thinking. There is an almost universal quest for easy answers and half-baked solutions. Nothing pains some people more than having to think. Amen. We're going to think. Martin Luther King, thank you. Thank you for K. Carl Smith, who thinks and is willing to fight. There are plenty of black voices on our side, by the way. This is not about black people versus white people. Karl Marx said in Das Kapital, education is free. Freedom of education shall be enjoyed under the condition fixed by law and under the supreme control of the state. No, Vermonters, you control your educational system here. And even if they push this in this year, you can take it back next year. Because I think a lot of those people who are implementing this will themselves start to understand the problems when you can't identify who an Abenaki person is. Right? How do you pass statutes giving money to Abenaki people when you can't find who they are, let alone who did what to when 400 years ago? Endless strife. Karl Marx said, it is not the consciousness of men that determines their being, but on the contrary, their social being that determines their consciousness. Identity politics. Now, I'm not going to the Marx thing, but this does stem in Marx. Marx was all about class. But this is worse. This is all about race. That's why it's really more like eugenics. And by the way, if you question the lobotomy movement when they were sticking a pipe in people's eyes by the tens of thousands, you would be excoriated. Don't you understand we're helping these people? Don't you understand this vaccine is good for them? That was supposed to be humor. I'm funny. Since when is it okay for schools to try to impact the subconscious of children? Anybody ever heard of Anthony Burgess in The Clockwork Orange? It is wrong for government to try to reprogram your prejudices. After all, you're born that way. Anybody get that? Who decides what moral caliber in schools, in a Marxist system apparently, that government is going to impose on your children? I think there should be a real movement towards school choice and people moving to private schools next year, because I don't know why I would ever trust anybody in this school system with my child or grandchild after they rammed this down our throats for 3 years before, letting us speak and then calling us racist for questioning it. Nope, the tide's turning. Frederick Douglass, I'm setting you up now. It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. Critical race theory creates broken men. The Constitution, those core principles that this gentleman will talk about, that builds strong children. He wrote, I prefer to be true to myself, even at the hazard of incurring the ridicule of others, rather than be false and incur my own abhorrence. See how that ties in with Aaron Kinsbottom? I prefer to be true to myself, even if I were a racist, rather than lie to you and say I wasn't. You can't compel someone. God does not compel you to not sin. He gave you free will. That's one thing we can observe is true about us. We all have the choice whether we do right or wrong. Frederick Douglass, where justice is denied, where poverty is enforced, where ignorance prevails, and where one class is made to feel this society is an organized conspiracy to oppress, rob, and degrade them, neither persons nor property will be safe. Critical race theory teaches black people and black children that all white people hate them. All the white system for 200, 400 years has been conspired against them. That whatever their lot in life is the fault of white people. And we wonder how that might impact the homelessness in our inner cities. This is exactly what we're teaching them. You'd better be right. You'd better be able to prove it with your quack science this time. Because this is worse than lobotomies and eugenics. And you've gone right for our kids in our school systems. That's why I drive so far. Because this is important. And that's why we need money, by the way. Because it ain't for me. I've proven to you, I'm not taking this money for me. I'm taking it for people that aren't getting enough for what they do. To suppress free speech is a double wrong. It violates the rights of the hearer as well as those of the speaker. Vermont's media all across the state have been saying anyone who questions critical race theory is a right-wing extremist who does not want to discuss racist racial history. That's a lie. It's layers of lies. Vermont Digger for years now will not print articles that say that Vermont has a proud abolitionist past. If you talk about those statistics, if you talk about Alexander Twilight, the only black American to be elected to a legislature in the country before the Civil War here in Vermont, after becoming the first Black American to go to college at Middlebury? They don't know. And you're not allowed to talk about it. Why? Because according to Ann Galloway, Vermont Digger, it implies a denial of systemic racism. Damn right it does. That's the point. Don't just look at the blemishes of Vermont without looking at its abolitionist past and the people in the cemeteries who died in the Civil War because they believed in these liberties. The first state in the country with a constitution, the only government in the Western world to ban slavery, and now we're told it wasn't good enough because people now have a better plan. It's called historical pride. People might not get all they want for work for in this world, but they must certainly work for all they get, according to Frederick Douglass. Not under critical race theory. You're going to transfer money, and that's not going to solve the problem, though, because what people need is human capital. Again, I refer to Thomas Sowell, brilliant writer. In a composite nation like ours, Frederick Douglass again, as before the law, there should be no rich, no poor, no high, no low, no white, no black, but common country, common citizenship, equal rights, and a common destiny. That's what the flag and the Constitution offers everyone. Critical race theory does not. It's divisive. You don't come together blue and red, Democrat, Republican under critical race theory. It's more like a religion. It is their way or none. And you'll see it all around right now. This is where we've all come together. This is what has kept us from falling apart. Change is only Malcolm X. I'll give you a couple more, and then we'll close. It's all right? These guys are smarter than me. So it's okay. I think. I don't want to. Is this all right? Because I do lose track of time. Now you tell me. A man who stands for nothing will fall for anything, said Malcolm X. You can't hate the roots of a tree and not hate the tree. You can't hate the roots of your whole country. You can't hate yourself for being white. You can't hate all the military who died. You can't hate the whole history of this nation and Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King and not kill the tree. Wendell Berry writes about this too in the environment. Oh, we hate humans because they destroy the planet, so we hate humans so much we're going to hate ourselves. You can't destroy your own culture without destroying yourself. Mao and Pol Pot knew this, and so did Malcolm X. Change is only a good thing if you change in a good way, he said. Malcolm X. This is not good change. Is it in a good way? This is the conversation that we're overdue to have. I believe in recognizing every human being as a human being, neither white, black, brown, or red. Malcolm X, I'm getting pretty extreme right now. Malcolm X would not agree with critical race theory because he knew better. He said, history is not hatred. How about those 4 words, critical race theory? Everything in critical race theory is about hatred and race. There is no forgiveness. Prostitution in Vermont, according to a statute this year, was introduced to keep black men from running away from white women. In 1915, it was passed by the suffragette movement to protect women. They've reversed it. That's in a statute. Lies only hold for so long. You can't rewrite history of Vermont as black, as a white supremacist society. Vermonters know. We were poor, right? Real poor. I believe in this. So education is an important element in the struggle for human rights. It is the means to help our children and thereby increase self-respect, not self-hatred and self-loathing for your whiteness. But once you get over that guilt, then you're liberated. Just read it. You can't make this up. And it's woven through everything, but now it's in the schools, so now they've gone a bridge too far. And he wrote, it is the process of miseducation that inhibits the full potential of a nation. And just because you have colleges and universities doesn't mean you have education. He wrote that long before eugenics and lobotomy showed us how much science can become a form of faith and religion and go awry on half-baked ideas that hurt people. Lobotomies hurt people irrevocably. If CRT were so good, it wouldn't have been snuck into schools. We wouldn't be intimidated and lied about. We wouldn't be attacked. And we wouldn't be having this event. If critical race theory is correct, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Frederick Douglass, and even K. Carl are Uncle Toms who sell the everybody is equal stuff because that was the ideology that white men imposed on them. That's what CRT teaches. Was it imposed on them? Was it? Or did they choose? Or was it something they saw hope in that's now being destroyed? If you look, I think you can see pretty clearly the difference between the coercion of this critical race theory and the vaccinations and the other things that are not coercive. You don't hear the CRT academics telling us why these men are wrong. Only the old white men who drafted the documents on which these men secured liberty. That was a pretty impressive feat back then. I don't think I'm as smart as those founders. Here's Ibrahim Kennedy. He is the critical race theorist. He's the black voice of today. The slaveholder wanted the freedom to enslave, he explained. There's no difference between that and the individual saying, I should have the freedom to infect people with COVID. I should have the freedom to kill and exploit and harass and terrorize. But if you don't get a vaccination, you're a slaveholder who wants to enslave other people to the risk of your germs. Quote, from the beginning of the American project, the powerful individual has been battling for his constitutional freedom to harm. And the vulnerable community is battling for its constitutional freedom from harm. This is Marxism. The opposite of the Constitution. He studied law, but he had to study the law. I studied the law. The law of America is that the individual rights are sacred and held apart from government intrusion, no matter what's going on now on so many levels. And that's what we're standing for. And I stand for the individual integrity and freedom of people on the left as well to have their views, including this guy. But there's a big difference between what this black leader said today and Malcolm X said, and what Frederick Douglass said, and what K. Carl Smith is going to, I don't cheer for this. So I've set you up because he's coming to a place where this CRT stuff is a lot further than anywhere else in the country, so I don't really expect him to be up to speed on all the specifics. But I do expect that you will, because that's what this stuff's here for. Get educated, spread the word, find out what the truth is. They don't want you to know. I do, and that's why I'm doing this. So I warmly and gratefully welcome Mr. K. Carl Smith here. I'm not from Alabama, I'm sweating. I'm glad I wore a short sleeve shirt. But this guy has a lot to share with us, and I know he came to hear it, so I'm very excited. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you for teeing that up for me.
I hope so.
I was so you don't know what I mean by that. Look, it is an honor and a pleasure for you to be here. I welcome you and bring greetings from the great state of Alabama. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself. I'm a native of Pine Bluff, Arkansas. My father is a math genius. Well, I say this now, I lost both my parents this year to COVID. Both my parents contracted COVID in January. My parents are 89 years old. My dad didn't last long at all. My mother actually got over COVID, but she died of a broken heart. My parents were married for almost 69 years. So I'm still struggling with that. That's a void. Those of us who experienced that kind of loss will never be filled in my life. But as a believer, I believe that they're now happy and they're together. I remember my mother's bedside, and she said, baby, I don't want to go back home. My husband's not there. I want to go to my new home and see my husband. So she's with the Father. So I don't share that too often, because when I share that, I can't get to my speech, but I'm going to go through this one. So I grew up I was born in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. My father's a math genius. So in 1963, when my father received his master's degree in mathematics from the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville, my father was hired by NASA. In 1964, he was in the first black groups of mathematicians that went to Alabama, and we worked with the German scientists while abroad. We went from Arkansas to Alabama. You don't follow me. We went from Arkansas to Alabama. We went from Arkansas to George Wallace country. We went from Arkansas to Jim Crow, Alabama. In 1963-64, a lot of blacks were fleeing the South, heading north for better employment opportunities and fleeing segregation. My father took his family further south. And as a young boy growing up, I have 3 siblings, 4 boys in all. All of us are 5 years apart. So you can see my father was a mathematician. He didn't want 2 boys in college at the same time. Kind of spread the thing out. My oldest brother is a retired Army officer. I'm also a retired Army officer. I served 17 years in active duty, United States Army. I like using the word retirement because the word retirement is not in the Bible. So I completed my service obligation in 1996. For my first look, Lieutenant Colonel, I decided to take my rank as a major in my pension and decided to do other things. My brother's 5 years my junior, he's a pastor 30 years. And my youngest brother, 10 years my junior, graduated from high school with a D-. Today he's a PhD physicist. It's not how you start the race that counts, it's how you finish the race. So my brothers and I, we come from good stock. Now, I surmise that the majority of you here are what I would call conservative, right? And now, there may be some here, people who are Democrats or liberals, who give you a word of warning. When I finish today, you're probably going to change your political affiliation. See, I grew up a staunch Democrat. I'll tell that story later. I grew up a staunch Democrat. Well, look, John teed it up well. We're in a fight for liberty. We are in a fight, and the other side, they're playing for keeps. And they're doing anything to make sure their agenda takes hold. And then now they're coming after our children. I don't care if you're a Democrat, I don't care if you're a Republican, that should bother you. It's not about labels right now, it's about our children. And the way we're going to save this nation, I contend, the way we're going to save this nation is through messaging. You and I, those of us who are liberty advocates, we got to get the trenches. We got to be effective in talking to our children, our grandchildren, our mother, our sister, our brothers, those within our sphere. We got to engage about the importance of liberty. Now here's the problem. If you identify yourself as a conservative, you got to understand that before you get a chance to speak, you have already been discredited. The left has, the Marxists, the left, the same thing. They have effectively destroyed that brand of conservatism. If you say you're a black conservative, a Reagan conservative, let's say you describe yourself as a Christian conservative, that's what you're saying, but that's not what people are hearing. Black conservative, you're a black racist. Christian conservative, you're a Christian racist. If you identify yourself as a constitutional conservative or a Tea Party conservative, now you are a racist. And the attack is on. The problem is no one is listening to us. Well, think about it. If I perceive somebody to be a racist, there's nothing that person can tell me. I'm not going to listen to them. When you tell somebody you're a conservative, you just grew 7 heads. Okay? That's been the case for a long time. We have lost that battle. It's time to do something differently. I'm going to play an audio for you. It's about a minute and a half long, seconds long. And you'll recognize the voice. I'm not going to tell you who it is. But this person is someone we have come to respect and love over the years. I want you to listen to what he has to say. Okay? I'll try to tee it up for you. Go up.
Having to say this, I don't like having to say this, but being honest with you and with myself is paramount. And I can tell you, and you know this without me telling you, that if conservatism and liberalism are brands, the left has succeeded in destroying the brand of conservative. All you have to say the word conservative, and they think you're talking about a Nazi or a racist. Pushing conservatism is not the answer. So what I would suggest to you, when you're out and about and you're doing, if you're on, you do an occasion where you have the opportunity to talk politics, people don't agree with you, do not use the word conservative. Do everything else, but don't call yourself that. Don't promote it. We've got a brand problem. It's time we have, and I hate having to admit it,
to abandon conservatism. It's just stop labeling everything we think or do as conservative and just do it.
Did you hear that? All that? Did you recognize that voice? Who was that? Rush Limbaugh. Rush Limbaugh made this comment 2018, November the 28th, 2018. I don't get a chance to listen to Rush too often because it comes on but my busy part of the day. So, but this particular day, my spirit just technically flipped through the radio stations and I landed on that show. And so Rush said this in the third hour of the show. Now, in summary, Rush is saying, don't stop being a conservative, but understand when it comes to engagement and messaging, we are on the fence. And we need to be on the offense all the time. So he said, stop identifying yourself as a conservative. So you see that Rush agrees with me. I've been saying this for the past 12 years. So here's the question. How should we identify ourselves? How should we do that? Kate Carl, I'm glad you asked. Several years ago, I was invited to a friend's home to watch our favorite football team play on television. There were 18 to 20 blacks who were there. All of them were black Democrats. And the subject of politics surfaced. When I shared with my friends that I was a conservative Republican, the attacks began. One after another, they called me everything but a child of God. Uncle Tom, foot shuffler, house nigga. Your parents must be disappointed in you. How could you do such a thing? Their insults ran the gamut. I went home that night thinking and mostly praying about how can I best articulate my conservative values and do it in a way where I can win the narrative and win them. How could I trump the race card, pun intended? About a year later, after reading, a lot of reading and research, I created something called the Frederick Douglass Republican Engagement Strategy. A year later, I invited those same 18 to 20 black friends of mine in my home to watch our favorite football team play on television. And of course, the subject of politics surfaced. This time they said, okay, Carr's a conservative. I said, wait a minute. I'm more than a conservative. I'm more than a Republican. I am a Frederick Douglass Republican, and I believe in the life-empowering values of Frederick Douglass. Respect for the U.S. Constitution. Respect for life. I believe in the limited power of government, economic prosperity, free speech, school choice, women's rights, the right to keep and bear arms, religious liberty. When I shared that with them, all of them started talking about how they were a Frederick Douglass Republican too. It worked. It worked. What I want to do with you today, before you leave here, you're going to know how to become a better ambassador of liberty, how to deliver the message, how to talk to people about what's really going on with critical race theory. And we're going to do it by leveraging the liberty message of the greatest liberty message in our nation's history, in my opinion, Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass is not only America's greatest liberty messenger, but I see him as the forgotten prophet. I was on a radio show not long ago talking about Frederick Douglass. Somebody called in. He said, now, why are you going back 100, 200 years about the writings of Douglass? Can you find somebody more contemporary to talk about? I said, wait a minute. I said, sir, do you happen to be a believer? He said, yeah. I said, when was the last time you read the writings of the Apostle Paul? He's been dead over 2,000 years. When you go back and read the writings of the Apostle Paul, who's been dead over 2,000 years to get some Christian inspiration, I'm going back 100 years, 200 years to get some liberty inspiration. Hello, caller, are you there? Frederick Douglass. Let me give you a quick refresher on Frederick Douglass. I'm going to talk about the engagement strategy and how it works. Then I'm going to get into this critical race theory. Frederick Douglass, born 1818 in the Eastern Shores area of Maryland. The way I like to put it, Frederick Douglass was born below poverty. See, when you're born into slavery, you're born below poverty. He never owned a pair of shoes until he was 8 years old, never slept in the bed till age 10. He was homeschooled, self-taught. Douglass started his own homeschooling program. You know why? He rejected the slave master's common core curriculum. That's why. Did y'all get that?
Yeah.
So guys, maybe I'm slow on the punchline. I gotta work with that. Okay.
Now it's us.
Okay, no, it's not you. It's just me. It's me. So Douglass, let me share some tidbits about Douglass's life that's going to blow your mind. Douglass escaped from slavery. He was a slave for 20 years, okay? He escaped from slavery in 1838 at the age of 20. At the age of 20, on the second attempt, he escaped from slavery. Frederick Douglass had 0 days of formal schooling, all homeschooled. All homeschooled. He was an advisor to 5 Republican presidents. 5 of them. Most folks don't get a chance to meet one president. This brother was an advisor to 5 U.S. presidents. Let me go through them right quickly. Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant, James Garfield, Rutherford Hayes, and Benjamin Harrison. Frederick Douglass wrote 3 autobiographies and a novel. I make that point because, based on my reading of history, 90% of blacks could not read or write. That brother wrote 3 books, 3 autobiographies, and a novel called The Heroic Slave. Frederick Douglass died 1895 at the age of 77. He died of a massive heart attack. How much money do you think Douglass had in savings at the time of his death? Not much? How much? You know the guess.
0.
0? 50,000.
I already know the answer.
You already know the answer. This is going to blow your mind. When I read it, it blew my mind. At the time of his death, 1895, Douglass had $300,000 in savings. Back then, in today's money, that's over $10 million. Douglass died of 1%. But he began his life as a sub-0%. You follow me? So you see that the life of Frederick Douglass is inspiring. And the reason why I say that because no matter which victim category that the Marxist left try to put people in, no American today can out-victimize Frederick Douglass. That's his life. Now, when it comes to the writings of Frederick Douglass, this is what we need to leverage to win the narrative and push back on Marxism and communism and those who want to turn the United States into a European socialist country. We should thank God that we have the literary legacy of Frederick Douglass to refute the false rhetoric of the left. Let me give an example. Matter of fact, let me set this up with a provocative statement. The liberty message of Frederick Douglass is more important than anything that the founding fathers had to say. That's blasphemy, K. Carl. K. Carl, that's heresy. How can you say such a thing? Let me prove my point. The founders gave us 2 magnificent documents. The Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, correct? Now, some of the founders, not all of them, some of the founders owned slaves. And so the slaves were freed not when the Constitution was ratified. In many cases, they freed their slaves after the death of the founder. And the left exploits that. These racist men who owned slaves gave us this basic document called the Constitution. On the other hand, Frederick Douglass did not own any slaves. He was a slave. And in his writings and in Douglass's speeches, he affirmed the founders and he affirmed the Constitution, and the left has no answer for that. Give an example. Douglass said on one occasion, he said, Quote, the Constitution reads, we the people. It does not read, we the white people, Douglass said. He would also say, if black folks are considered to be people, then they should be benefactors of the Constitution. Douglass concluded by saying, the problem is not with the Constitution, the problem is in the application of the Constitution. The problem is not with the Bible, the problem is in how the Bible is applied. So thank God, again, we have this literary legacy of Frederick Douglass to make the left. Now they're going to go back to France and take that socialist, Marxist stuff with them. They had no answer for Frederick Douglass. The Marxists have no answer for Frederick Douglass, and they never will. It'll behoove us to leverage him. So what is a Frederick Douglass Republican? I'm glad you asked. In lieu of saying conservative, I am a Frederick Douglass Republican. To be a Frederick Douglass Republican has nothing to do with your skin color. It's about values. What are those values? We call them life-empowering values. When you hear me speak, you're going to think they're conservative values. Oh, I don't use that word conservative. They're life-empowering values. Respect for the U.S. Constitution. Respect for life. The belief in limited power of government, economic prosperity, free speech, school choice, women's rights, right to keep and bear arms, legal migration. See, Frederick Douglass wrote about all these things. He wrote about it. So we have this legacy now of his writings that the left has not gotten to a point to rewrite yet. We got to leverage that. So a Frederick Douglass Republican, it's not about color, it's about values. If you embrace those life-empowering values, then you are a Frederick Douglass Republican. So, okay, Carl, why does it work? God is so wise. The phrase Frederick Douglass Republican is an oxymoron for a lot of people. Frederick Douglass is an icon of liberty. Republican, just like the word conservative has been demonized by the left, is an icon of racism. Liberty, racism, the two just don't go together. So when you say that I'm a Frederick Douglass Republican and you got the content to come behind it, meaning what do you mean by that? You now, when you say that I'm a Frederick Douglass Republican, the person you're speaking to, because it's an oxymoron, become curious of what are you talking about? That's when you come with the ammunition. And you articulate what you mean by that. I'm a Frederick Douglass Republican, and I hold Frederick Douglass in high esteem, and I agree with his life-empowering values of respect for the U.S. Constitution, respect for life. I believe in limited power of government, economic prosperity, free speech, school choice. You don't have to write that down. It's in my book. I'll talk about that in a minute, too. Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass. You got that piece? The message piece? So if you're going to be effective, if we're going to be effective to defeat the critical race theory and anything that's out there to destroy our nation, we got to become better messengers of liberty. We got to become Frederick Douglass liberty ambassadors. You follow me? It's not going to happen under the banner of conservatism. Not using that word. Forget about it. Don't believe me, believe Rush. Okay? You got that piece, right? We lost that battle. We got to find a new way to identify ourselves, Frederick Douglass Republican. Here's what I want to share with you about Frederick Douglass and the critical race theory and why Douglass is the answer, why we got to leverage this. This critical race theory, all it is a communist, Marxist agenda to destroy the United States from the inside. That's all it is. It's based on Marxism. It's based on Marxism. There was in 1963, I believe, there was a congressman out of Florida. He went to the floor of the House. He went to the floor of the House, our nation's capital, and he read into the congressional record the 45 goals of the United States Communist Party. I'm not going to read all 45 to you. I'm reading about 3 or 4 and let you listen to this because a lot of these things have already been accomplished. So, bear with me 1 second. Let me pull this up. Okay. So, January 10, 1963, Congressman Albert Furlong from Florida read the list of 45 communist goals for America into the congressional record. Let's see if some of these goals have hit home. Number 15 says, capture one or both political parties in the United States. Check. Get control of the schools. Use them as transmission belts for socialism, current communist propaganda. Soften the curriculum. Get control of teachers' associations. Put the party line in textbooks. Check. Gain control of key positions in radio, TV, and motion pictures. Check. Why do you think there's never been a movie about Frederick Douglass? Because the views of Frederick Douglass is counter to the socialists in Hollywood. He affirms the founding fathers. He affirms the Constitution. If you tell the truth about his writings, you have to say that. Well, so therefore they won't do a movie. Continue discrediting American culture by degrading all forms of artistic expression. And American Communist Cell was told to, quote, eliminate all good sculpture from parks and buildings. Check. Present homosexuality, degeneracy, promiscuity as normal and healthy. Check. Eliminate prayer or any phase of religious expression in schools on the grounds that it violates principle of separation of church and state. Check. Discredit the American Constitution by calling it inadequate, old-fashioned, out of step with modern times. Check. Now let's skip to the last one here. Create the impression that violence and insurrection are legitimate aspects of the American tradition, that students and special interest groups should rise up and make it a united force to solve economic, political, and social problems. Remember last summer? Check. We're in this fight. I contend the way we're going to win, we leverage Frederick Douglass. Let me contrast Frederick Douglass and Karl Marx when we get into this critical race theory. Frederick Douglass and Karl Marx were both born in 1818. No, Frederick Douglass was born into poverty. Karl Marx was born of white privilege. My brothers are pastors in the church, and I was talking to some members of my church, some young kids who were ready to BLM. I said to them, I said, you despise white privilege, don't you? I said, yeah. But you follow the philosophy of a guy who was of white privilege. Karl Marx is a poster child for white privilege. Research. I tell my 10-year-old son, don't believe anything I tell you. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, but make sure you check it out. Make sure you process what goes through your ears. Karl Marx. Douglass had a newsletter called the North Star. Guess who was a subscriber to Douglass's newsletter? Karl Marx. Karl Marx cherry-picked Douglass' writings on the philosophy about humanity and serving humanity. I think Communist Manifesto came out what year? 1848? Something like that? Douglass wrote his first book, 1845. Karl Marx. Now, what you got to keep in mind, when the communists came over to the United States around like 1828, because Karl Marx, in the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx's argument was, we have to have a revolution, and he pitted classes against each other. They have lots against the have-nots. But when the communists tried to do that in America in terms of class, it wouldn't work. You know why? Because in the United States, you can have a rags to riches story. You can be poor one day and be an entrepreneur and be rich the next. So that classism won't work in the United States. So what do they decide to use? They decide to use race. Why? Because colors don't change. That's why the critical race theory is based on race. It is intentionally set to create animosity between white and blacks. Because the left, the communists understand if you're going to destroy America, you got to do it based on race. This book here is entitled Color, Communism, and Common Sense. Written by this black guy named Manning Johnson. You can get it on Amazon. You also go online and put in the title of the book and put down PDF. You get a free copy of it. Just read it. Manning Johnson was a black guy who became disillusioned about the progress of blacks under capitalism. So he became a communist. Manning Johnson was so articulate that the communists sent him to training in Moscow. He reached the executive level of the Communist Party in the United States. And he had a chance to see, witness what was going on. He said, wait a minute, this is not what I thought it was going to be. So he wrote this book detailing the strategy of communism in the United States. Manning Johnson, quick read, 76 pages. One thing I learned about reading this book, whenever anybody opposes a communist agenda, they're going to call you a fascist. They're going to call you Uncle Tom. They'll call you a hate individual. Now, here's what I remember reading Manning Johnson. You know how sometimes the word Uncle Tom has a negative piece to it? An Uncle Tom, in terms of negative piece, is a black person that's a sellout to their community. Okay? You know who coined that phrase, Uncle Tom, is a negative word? The Marxists did it. The communists did it. Manning Johnson talks about it. They came up with that word. So when they had a black person come out talk about racial healing, and that blacks got to have responsibility in freedom, he's an Uncle Tom. They want to make sure that the opposition to Marxism, to communism, is isolated and is seen as a disgrace to this community. That's how they silence the opposition. I'm telling you, every house needs to have this book. The left can't say this guy's a conservative. No, he was a Marxist. He was a communist. He's talking about everything we're dealing with. So, the best way, the most effective way to defeat Marxism is through Frederick Douglassism. We got to take the liberty message of Frederick Douglass to counter the tyrannical, the anti-liberty, anti-God message of communism, Marxism. Let's just be honest about it. The party they took over is the Democrat Party. If John F. Kennedy was alive today, he would not get elected as a Democrat. They're going extreme left. They're going extreme crazy. Anybody that talks about infanticide will do anything. I do believe that God has taken the left, the Marxists, and he has turned it over to their reprobate mind. They have no sense of conscience. That's why they're trying to ram this stuff down our throat. We got to live with Frederick Douglass. I sat down, I read the critical race theory. But when you read it now, it's not written on a 6th grade, 7th grade level. It's written at an academic level. You got to make sure you understand what words they're using. They're not going to use a word in our common language. But when you take a look at critical race theory, there are a lot of assertions they make. Now, first of all, it's a theory. It's a theory, but they want to treat our children like they're social guinea pigs. It's a theory. They've been tested. but they're going to put on our children like the social guinea pigs. One of the assertions of the critical race theory is this, that blacks are perpetual victims of white racism. Perpetual victims. Forever victims. One thing bothering me, John, about the critical race theory, they say that whites are inherently racist. Well, how do white liberals give themselves a pass?
That's right.
I don't get that. Now we talk about conservatives are racist. See, if you're a white liberal, you're pure and pristine, you can't sin. That's why you don't need a God, because you can't sin. Because you think you're a God. We'll get to that in a little later. So, what I did was, I sat down and I said, what is the best way to dismantle the critical race theory? How can we just tear this thing apart and be done with it? The best way to dismantle the critical race theory is take a look at America when racism was at its worst. And when was that? During Douglass's time. The racism that does exist in the United States today is pale in comparison to what Douglass had dealt with. We've come a long way. We have a lot of racial healing. But see, what the Marxists want to do, they want to make sure you understand there's been no gain in forced race relations. That it's just as bad now as it was before. That's a lie. But they don't want that to come out. Mary Johnson talks about that, by the way. So, in this piece about how blacks are perpetual victims of white racism, I went back through reading some of the writings of Frederick Douglass. And I found a quote from Frederick Douglass. See, Douglass said on one occasion, he said, stop treating blacks like they're a special class of citizen. Stop treating them like they always got to need help. Douglass said, you didn't do anything special for the Irish. When the Emancipation Proclamation was being signed and 4 million blacks technically was going to be free from slavery, they came to Frederick Douglass, the civil rights leader at that time, and said, the question was, what shall we do with the Negro? They asked Douglass. Douglass responded by saying, what do you mean, what shall you do with the Negro? Don't you think you've done enough? You made him a slave. Stop playing mischief with his life. Douglass said, leave him alone and mind your own business. Amen. Stop treating black folks like they're social guinea pig. Here's something I wrote on this card. I'm talking this card before. See if this makes sense to you. I can't read. What's up top? Oh, yeah. So I have my glasses on, I got it back. It says here, convinced that blacks cannot take care of themselves, needing masters to rule them and feed them, Marxists, liberals if you will, think their instruction and social benevolence is better for them than giving them liberty. That's what they think. That's a slave master mentality. When you go back and read the writings of Frederick Douglass in the first autobiography, Douglass talked about the slave master mentality. The slave master mentality was, look, black folks can't take care of themselves. And God made us to take care of them. So we got to make them our slaves because they can't handle liberty. Douglass wrote about that. See, why is Douglass key? When you leverage the liberty message of a former slave, how can you argue with Frederick Douglass, his love for the Constitution, his admiration for the founding fathers? And the left, and once we really grow this liberty movement of people like you and I who leverage Frederick Douglass, who win this narrative, the left not only going to go back to France, they're going to start jumping out of 12-story buildings. They have no answer for Frederick Douglass, and they never will. The second thing, it's like this video, one of the other assertions of the critical race theory is that whites are inherently racist and they have no redemptive qualities. You're exactly right. Meaning that there's no God. There's no God. If there's no God, there's no exodus from Egypt. If there's no God, there is no redemption. So in this card, I found what Douglass did. 10 years after he escaped from slavery, Douglass, he wrote a letter to his former slave master. And he said to his slave master, look, I forgive you for all things you did to me. So I'm going to use you as an example how men ought to treat each other. And Douglass said that letter, oh, by the way, I want you to free all 400 of your slaves. And until you do, I'm going to write about you in my speeches, I'm going to talk about you in my book, I'm going to call you out on Twitter and Facebook. Okay? Within a year, his former slave master, get this, his former slave master repented and freed all 400 of his slaves in less than a year. Repentance. And you got to leverage that. Because when you get the card, Douglass used the word repentance in his quote. And when the slave master freed all 400 of the slaves, that was 15 years, before the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. Agitation and repentance work. So much for the critical race theory. Here's another assertion that's on this card. I just covered three. The critical race theory, when you really take a look at it, then you really get it down to its least common denominator. It's all about changing the private worship of us from God to government. That's what it's all about. They want us to kneel down to the altar of the almighty government instead of the altar of the almighty God. And they play games to do that. There's a quote from Frederick Douglass that chews that up. I'm going to paraphrase this quote. That's why I say that Douglass is the forgotten prophet. He has his literary legacy about liberty that we got to leverage. In a speech, see, what we got here, every speech Douglass gave, he wrote it out. That's why we have this literary legacy. He gave a speech called The Nature of Slavery. See, you got to understand now the nature of slavery. The techniques of oppression used by the slave master are identical to the techniques of oppression used by the slave government. It's the same technique. Douglass said, quote, the first aim of slavery is to separate a man and a woman from their God and remove all sense of religious responsibility. It separates a person from their maker. And when you separate a person from their God, from their maker, then they are left in the hands of despotic, evil fellow citizens, communism. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. There's some aspect of what Karl Marx wrote I had to agree with. Just one. Capitalism is bad. Communism is worse. When capitalism is practiced in a way where it's cutthroat. The slave masters never capitalists. But they use slavery, why? To make the money. So, but I have a better chance of reforming something when it's capitalism. So that's the difference between Douglass and Karl Marx. Karl Marx was a revolutionist. Douglass said, I'm not a revolutionist, I'm a reformer. Let's keep what we have that works, but make it better. So, it's key that we leverage this. So what I did, I brought some cards with me. I brought a book. I wrote this book back in 2011. The book is entitled Frederick Douglass Republican, The Movement to Reignite America's Passion for Liberty. This is not a dissertation on the political thoughts of Douglass, but what it is a liberty Messenger Handbook. It teaches you how to engage your family members, your friends, and people who may not look like you about the importance of liberty, free speech, personal responsibility by the Legend of Writings of Douglass. So what I did at that time, I took 4 life empowering values, and I gave you 5 quotes what Douglass said about each one of them. What did Douglass say about respect for the U.S. Constitution? See, the left is attacking that, but we look at what Frederick Douglass had to say compared to what they had to say. It's a message of a former slave residence with people. What did Douglass say about respect for life? The 5 things Douglass said about the belief in personal responsibility. And what Douglass said about the belief in limited government. Now, let me stop here. In the book, I call it the belief in limited government. I don't say it that way anymore. The way I say it now is the belief in the limited power of government. Because when you say I believe in limited government, what the Marxists will do, the left will do, they'll twist your words and say, oh, you believe in limited government, you want to take folks' entitlements away. I believe in limited power of government, but I want to keep more of the money that I make. I have some books here. I have some cards here. They come as a set. But you gotta know how to trump the race card first in order to be a messenger. If you don't trump the race card first, you're on the fence. Okay? The book is free. The autograph in each book, I'm gonna give y'all a deal. Normally, I sell this set for $30. I'm gonna do it for $20. You get the book, my autograph in each book, and you get 10 of these, it's 20 CRT cards, 20 of these cards. And in the back of the book, so you got the book, also you get what I call engagement cards. In the back of each book are 5 engagement cards. Let me tell you how it works. On the back of the book, there's 6 life empowering values of what Douglass said about each one of them. What did Douglass say about free speech, the Constitution, the right to keep and bear arms, economic prosperity? Here's what I learned. When you leverage what Frederick Douglass had to say and you make that part of your language of liberty, people will listen to you and race comes off the table. Here's what I learned over the past 12 years doing this. When a white person says in all sincerity, I hold Frederick Douglass in high esteem, and I share his life empowering values, respect for the Constitution, respect for life. When you use this FDR, not Roosevelt, it's not even your thing, Frederick Douglass Republican. When you use a Frederick Douglass Republican engagement strategy, it's more effective when a white person uses it than when I use it. Because you don't expect a white conservative to say, I hold Frederick Douglass in high esteem. Why? Because why? What we hear on CNN, MSNBC, the white conservatives are racist. A racist is not going to say, I hold this black man in high esteem. But when you do that, you got the content behind it, race comes off the table, and you're talking to people because you're in control of the narrative now about the importance of liberty. About Frederick Douglass versus Karl Marx. We're in a battle for world dominance. Karl Marx in one corner versus Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass win all the time. You know, Karl Marx died destitute. Frederick Douglass died of 1%. I shared this card with some BLM kids in my church. I did share both of them with them. First of all, what I learned is many people who embrace Marxism or go to college, come back and they're a little socialist, they never heard the liberty message coming from the writings of Frederick Douglass. Never heard it. Just like Thomas, they never heard it. So when I gave this card to some BLM kids in my church, I said, check this out. We Frederick Douglass say about critical race theory. They know about critical race theory. I said what Frederick Douglass had to say. Their mouth dropped. They couldn't say a word. Then they came back and said, well, the Constitution is a racist document and talk about the 3/5 clause. See, I'm a graduate of historical black college. I was taught in college, and it's still being taught today, or like with our kids, especially black kids, that the Constitution is a racist document, referring to the 3/5 clause, John, because they're saying that the 3/5 clause meant that blacks are 3/5 of a human being. That's what I was taught. But Frederick Douglass answered that question back in 1861. March 26, 1861, Douglass in Glasgow, Scotland. He was actually in a debate. It was Douglass who gave me clarity about the 3/5 clause. Douglass said, wait a minute. The 3/5 clause has nothing to do with the personhood of a black individual. It was a compromise approach used by the northern free states upon the southern slave states. To see in the Constitution, for every 30,000 citizens, you would get one congressional representation. They wanted to count every black person in slavery as one person, one vote. They had like 4 million blacks in slavery. They weren't going to free them now, but they want to count them as one person, one vote to up their numbers for congressional representation. So the free states said, no, if you free them, we'll let you count them as one person, one vote. But since you can't free them, we'll let you count the slave population at 3/5 of a vote. Douglass talked about that. I got his quote on page 18 in the book. Woke me up. I shared that with them, the BLM kids in my church. I could have dropped the microphone on. They never heard the liberty message from Frederick Douglass. That's why we got to leverage that. We got to make that part of our language. You got to carefully study and show yourself approved. Okay? This is not a gimmick. This is not some cheap magician's trick that sprang forth from the head of a philosophical Zeus. It's a divinely inspired message that God has given me to share with you. Out of 350 million people in the United States, I won the lottery. But God has given me this message to teach you how to engage, how to share the message of liberty, how to fight against what we're dealing with. For the past 12 years, I've been traveling the country, and I go out and I preach to the choir. I go out and I preach to the choir. Why? Because the choir got to know how to go out and bring some more choir members in. And the choir needs a new song to sing. I love hymns, but the hymn's not working like that. I got to put some Frederick Douglass in it and let you sing that kind of song. Okay? Get my drift. Make sense to you? I forget anything? I talk about Manny Johnson. You gotta read that. It's a quick read. It's a snatch read. I have some here. I put some skin in the game. All right, 20 for the set, almost 30. I'll do 20 because it's more important that you get this resource and start using it. I don't want to take this home with me. I gotta give it to you. You gotta put it into practice. When you come up, you do this transaction, get my business card. On my website, I have a free mini course, about 4 or 5 videos, where I get more into this engagement strategy. It's like 4 or 5 videos, 5-6 minutes long. I talk about how we're in this fix to win this narrative, how we lost the narrative, how we're going to get it back, and I kind of role play with you some things about the engagement strategy, how it works. I think that's all I wanted to share. John, we can do some Q&A now if you want to. Make sense to you? I'm expecting some questions from you, okay? So coming up, now, if you come up, please give me a question. Don't make a statement. I want to respect everybody's time.
Jeez, I went to law school with all my white privilege, and I'm still upstaged by this guy. He doesn't even sweat. Did you see that? He's wearing a jacket. He's making me sweat watching.
So this is the fun part. We've already got a hand up. And yes, please, and I'll repeat the question, or you can, and for whoever you wish to ask a question, please do.
There's a microphone.
Oh, there's a microphone here if you want to come on, and then we'll have a recording.
I wanted to ask, hey, Carl, if you've gone to Congress and get some of those ding-dongs to listen to you.
Say it again now.
Have you gone to Congress and addressed some of the ding-dongs and other flavors of food that children eat?
No, I have not gone to Congress and talked to the ding-dongs in Congress. But my thing is that if we're going to save this nation, it's not going to be a top-down approach. It's got to be a grassroots. Okay, it's not going to come from top-down. I'm not talking to some of my congressman, he gets it, out of Alabama. I'll talk to some individually, but that's not something that has happened. It may happen. We'll see. But I'm not looking for that to happen. And let me say this about the critical race theory, what's going on in our country, our schools. We can battle the left on this for decades to come. But here's my thing. I think this critical race theory is so urgent and important of the issue. It's time to boycott. It's time to pull them out. It's time for concerned parents, regardless of your label, political label. It's time for concerned teachers. It's time for students to walk out of the schools. The teachers march all the time. We need to boycott. We're not going to put up with this. They're not going to listen otherwise until they lose their job. And look, COVID-19, I lost both my parents because of this, but in some way it was I hate to say this, a blessing in disguise. Because of COVID-19 with remote learning, parents in the kitchen now hearing what the child was learning on the computer. Wait a minute, if it wasn't for COVID, we wouldn't know about this. And now we know how to teach our child at home. I think it's that serious of a concern. It's time to vote. I have a 10-year-old son. My son does not go to a public school. He's in a private school. I'm going to pull him out of that. In his homeschooling. Yes, ma'am.
Just a couple things. There is going to be on August 11th, in high noon, is a walkout Wednesday.
A walkout Wednesday?
Yep.
On
So
Wednesday
go
too.
online and check it out.
Walkout Wednesday.
Finally, all that is necessary to deal with bullies is to stand up. Just like a schoolyard bully. You punch that bully in the nose.
Yeah, remember now, we're in the majority.
Right.
We're in the majority. But we act like we're in the minority. And if we had the fight in us that the left has in them, oh, we'll be out of here. We gotta have that fight. God needs some warriors. We just gotta stop being political chumps and be some champions. I'm sold out to this. I mean, this is about liberty. I'm all about liberty. I'm all about my God-given rights and free will. Anything evil, anything that degrades another human being, I'm against that. And communism, Marxism, you gotta read Manny Johnson's book. He was a communist. He tells all. He died, by the way, in a serious car accident. After the book came out.
Clinton's.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Let me come back to you. Yes, sir.
Why do you think they're doing this, and why do you think the teachers union in the United States is so involved?
Well, I think the
What are
Marxists
they getting out of it?
power, money, and when you read Manny Johnson's book, he talks about why they're doing it. This comes out of Moscow, okay? Keep in mind now, God and communism cannot coexist. What they're getting out of it is control. Control somebody else's life. I got a good friend, Raphael Cruz, is Ted Cruz's father. Raphael told me, if you heard Raphael speak, he tells a story. But Raphael escaped from Cuba. He said that when he was a young boy in Cuba, the Castro would send his soldiers out to the schools. And they go inside the classroom, they'll tell the students in first grade, put your head down and pray to God for some candy. And every kid put their head down, pray to God for some candy. He said, raise your head up. Where's your candy? Of course, no candy is there. Put your head down again. Pray to Fidel for some candy. They put their head down, and the soldier would secretly, quietly walk around each desk, put some candy on the desk. Raise your head. There's your candy. Changing the private worship. And they're doing it with our children. What's going to happen is with the race theory, they're going to create an internal race war. When you have an internal race war, America is destroyed from the inside. They're purposely creating a situation where they're always going to promote racial strife. That's what the left does. That's what the communists do. That's what the Marxists do. How are we going to counter that? We got to counter Marxism with Frederick Douglassism. And thank God we got the history of Frederick Douglass to counter. If we didn't have Frederick Douglass, I don't know what we'd be doing. Because why? You can't play the race card on Douglass. You can't do it. It doesn't work. Question.
Yes. Have you gone into into detail about the funding of the Hannah Nicole Jones, the 1619 project?
I don't get the funding of it, but
Okay, if you want to
Put
put
it
it
on
on
Mars,
Mars, Shell Oil put up some money to have her funded. And-
Okay.
Okay.
I'm not surprised.
And so I definitely take your point, and I think it's great.
Yeah.
I think though, it's not just communism. I believe that it is global authoritarianism and the power of corporate control, which is intentionally, as you say, working to destroy the United States from within.
Yeah.
I think communism, yes, and worldwide authoritarian structures
I agree with that.
that are involved. So I would just encourage an openness or a mention of those kind of globalist forces that don't like the Constitution and don't like the freedom.
Yeah. Yeah. To me, yeah, I agree with that. And it both two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
Two sides of the same coin. Yeah, I agree with that. Because they work together. It's a conspiracy. They hate liberty. They hate freedom. They hate that we are trying to be independent with our lives. They want to become modern day slave master and make us their slaves, regardless of color now. Yes.
I have a saying, evil never wins, and they can all join my club. My club is called 6x6, and I make Crawford 6 long, 6 wide with drawers on the side so they can take it all with it. Because they're never going to do this. Because come September, these kids can't go back to school, and they have to wear a face mask. I think that's when all the mother bears are going to stand up and say, you know what? We've had enough of this.
Yeah. And I would say to you, so
Whether
that
you're black, white, green, yellow, rich, poor, don't mess with Mama Bear.
yeah, be it communism or the corporate you talked about, bottom line, it's a spiritual battle. All this under a spiritual battle. And Satan will not win, but we gotta fight until we win. That's what's going on.
So I think some of the Republicans, conservatives, lefts, rights, whatever, are finally standing up. Because some people are just not good at fighting.
Yeah.
You know,
And I think
I think it has to be bred in you, and they're silent, they don't want to say anything, they don't want their friends to not like them, whatever it is.
I think one thing you gotta do-
What blows my mind is that they'll stand on the corner with a Black Lives Matter sign, and then go home to their $1 million house in Manchester, and not know what it is to be poor and black, and not have an education or vocation.
Got it.
You talked about boycotting,
Yeah.
can you expand on that a little bit?
Stop going to school. Stop the students.
I think I have to repeat the question back.
He said, talk about-
Because otherwise they can't hear the audio.
He said, I talked about boycott. Can I expand on that? Go back and Google the boycott in New York in 1964. When, because of segregation in New York, segregated schools, concerned parents, concerned teachers, students, they stopped going to school. They went to the streets, and stuff changed. And that's where we are. Boycott works. Remember the Montgomery bus boycott down in Alabama? It works. When you start affecting the money, people start changing. Yeah.
Can I-
Sure. Sure.
That, in Vermont, we can do this. We may not know I believe we can opt out. Do we not?
Well, we should, and if not, we should be able to. I think next year a lot of people are going to be pulling their kids out of school, like I said. But something I want to emphasize about the communism thing, kind of like what Kay Carl was saying about conservatism. We need to recognize that this is a generation that likes communism. So if we really want to have clarity of message, it really does do us better to make it in terms of totalitarianism, not to differ it in one way of what you're teaching. This critical race theory came from critical theory. It all came from the same place. But it did come from the same place as the progressive eugenics movement. Just think about that, all right? But we do well for young people to talk in terms of race and to make the rubber meet the road, like Kay Carl's saying. Ask the liberal this: because I've done this, because I'm practicing. Do you think that children should be segregated based on their skin color in Vermont schools? That's a great place to start a conversation, because once they say no, and if they say yes, listen to their justification. But anyway, sorry, so
Yeah.
we should have a boycott. We don't need a boycott. We need private school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I would say, John, you're right. Most children today, most people don't understand communism, socialism, Maoism. They don't understand totalitarianism either. You got to give a different metaphor. What is the metaphor? Give them a slavery metaphor. And when you get the slavery metaphor, now you start bringing in the stories that Douglass talked about in his experience. Douglass said one occasion while he was on the plantation, he said, his slave master came up to him and said, Freddie, make no plans for the future, I'm going to take care of you. Douglass said, right then I started getting my plan together for an escape. That just didn't sound right to me. Yeah. So I think that slavery metaphor, you bring in Douglass' story, you got to tell the stories that Douglass wrote about, and I call it the parallel of oppression. Techniques used to create oppression by the slave master are identical to the techniques of oppression used by the slave governor. I'll see the blog. I wrote a blog on that and laid out what those techniques are.
Yeah, great teaching.
Thank you, sir.
Great inspiration, and we need to support you. And
Yes, sir. I take classic gold, silver.
But here's a comment. We can go away from here excited that
Yes.
we learned some good stuff.
Yes.
We can go away excited that there's a good group here. But if we don't step up,
Got it.
if we don't step up and actually run for school boards
Yes.
and things like that,
Yes.
then we're
Yes.
missing the point.
Stop looking outside yourself for leadership. Pick yourself to be a leader. Stop looking outside yourself for the cavalry to come. Cavalry ain't coming, we're the cavalry. Trump did his job. He needs a little help. We got to do our job. We got to become better messengers of liberty. You're exactly right. Don't leave here information overload, or don't leave here being information obese. Work this thing off. Exercise, engage, use this. Don't be intellectually obese with this knowledge. Work it off. Engage your friends, your family members, and some who may not look like you, but know how to do it. Now, I'm not here to push my faith, but when I read the Bible is a how-to book if you know how to look for the answers. I would say to you this. God gave me this. In the Bible, he had me study the ministry of the Apostle Paul. And when you read the Apostle Paul, God gave us the blueprint on how to trump the race card in the Bible. Y'all remember the Apostle Paul, who was before he became a champion of Christianity, he was a bloodthirsty persecutor of the Christians, right? And the Gentiles shook with fear when they heard Paul's name. Because really, Paul was a diversity engagement expert, right? God called him to take the gospel to the Gentiles, people of different races. By occupation, Apostle Paul, he was an attorney, and he was a what? A tent maker. God called the apostles to establish a big tent. Big tent is a metaphoric expression we use all the time as Republicans, as conservatives. We got to have a big tent. So allow me to use my biblical imagination for one moment. What was some of the talk among the Gentiles about Paul? Can you imagine? You know, Paul had his Damascus Road experience. No, because there's no denying that the Apostle Paul had a tremendous impact in the early growth of the church when he engaged the Gentiles, right? But what was some of the talk among the Gentiles about Paul? Can you imagine him sitting back and saying, Y'all look at Paul. That no good liar called himself a Christian evangelist. Y'all know what he did to those people in Jerusalem, Judea. Y'all heard about that? He's trying to trick us to become Christians. You know why? He wants to trick us to become Christians so he can persecute us too. So the question is, how did the Apostle Paul overcome the negative perception that the Gentiles had of him? Oh, he's a racist. He's a bigot. I'm preaching the word. He's a racist and a bigot. He speaks a forked tongue. Any of those words sound familiar? That's what they say about conservatives. So the question is, how did Apostle Paul trump the race card? He did two things, basically. Number one, in terms of preaching, he had a testimony. He didn't just quote Christ, he talked about how the teaching of Christ changed his thinking, changed his mind, made him a new person. We got to have a similar testimony. We got to get people to think that we had our Saul to Paul conversion as conservatives. What's that testimony, K. Carl? Look, I've been inspired by the life and writings of Frederick Douglass. I'm more than a conservative Republican. I'm a Frederick Douglass Republican, and I believe in his life-empowering values. What's the other thing Paul did? Paul had good deeds. He traveled throughout the Roman Empire, Asia Minor. He ministered to the people that he's supposed to be racist towards. He healed the sick. He brought somebody back from the dead. When you put good deeds together and a testimony, because one personal testimony is the most powerful, persuasive messaging strategy. When you put the two together, the left has no answer for it. I was an advisor to President Trump's campaign for the past 2 years, and the whole issue of diversity outreach. And I said to them, I said, look, you got to understand when you engage the black community how black folks think. I said, you got to understand which biblical lens do many blacks who vote Democrat view the world. And they view the world through Proverbs 21:1. And I'm talking about myself here. Proverbs 21:1 reads, the heart of the king is in the hands of God. Meaning that God can take a quote-unquote racist president, and they call Trump a racist, right? They call us racist. Okay? President Trump is not a racist, but the left does that. But they think that God can take a quote-unquote racist president and use him to bless me. Criminal justice reform. Opportunity zone that President Trump legislation passed. Unemployment all-time low in the black community. So President Trump didn't get the credit for it. God got the credit because God made the racists do it. That's why we got to jump the race card. You follow? All President Trump had to do, and I've told him this, but he got to have the content come behind it. All he had to do, go to a debate, go on your stump speech, and just say, you know what, I've been inspired by the life and writings of Frederick Douglass. I'm going to continue past legislation that's in line with Frederick Douglass' life and power and values. You know what? I'm more than a Republican and a conservative. I'm a Frederick Douglass Republican. Once he made that statement, what's the left going to do? Then how are you going to change his testimony? Powerful. It works. When you change your family, how they vote. My parents were, they just call themselves conservatives now. In lieu of saying conservative, they describe themselves as Frederick Douglass Republican. In the black neighborhood, see, you got to understand that in the black neighborhood, the word conservative is not the language of liberty, it is the language of oppression. Not just the black community, because the left has demonized the word, it's all over now. You follow me? That's the point Rush was making. Make sense to you? All right, that's all I got. Yes, ma'am.
First of all, I want to thank you. I truly believe that black liberty activists can save this country.
You want me to quit? Is that a question?
No, yes, I do. I do.
I'm going to ask you a question when you finish. Yeah. Go ahead.
I put this event up on Facebook, and a lot of people were very skeptical that there was segregation in Vermont schools, because that was part of the title of this presentation.
Well, there's segregation, isn't it?
So, could you give some examples?
Aren't they teaching the critical race theory by race now? Aren't they separating the white kids and black kids?
Yeah, let me take that one.
My kids are out of school, so they're grown up.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
So this is an important fact. I'm a lawyer. I did litigation. When I come in front of you and you're a judge, any lawyers here? You're one of them. Guess what I need? Facts and the law. The fact is that in the Essex school, if you have any questions, I will send you the materials. They have materials, we put them up in Rutland, where it says, if you're a BIPOC student and you want to be separate, you can go to room 104. All right, so that's one case where they're actually doing it, but if you start looking in the materials, you're going to see the doors open. I have in these materials a copy of our legislature, which has a, can you hear me that sheet right here, Gary? I think it might be right here, bless you. I may not have it with me, I may not have attached it, And this has some of the bills. All right, here's a read for you to answer that question. They were having press conferences where white people were not allowed to attend, including white reporters in Burlington. They thought that was okay. They have safe spaces for a long time in Burlington where people of color could go because they're not safe everywhere else. They're trying to create a black bank in Vermont under H.273 to distribute $10 million to people of color, and the bank itself has to be run by people of color because you can't trust white people to give out the money. This is racism. This is already happening, and it's violating the 14th Amendment, the decision of Bakke versus Regents of the State of California, the University of California, because that decision says that the 14th Amendment protects white people from discrimination too. So if you want to change it, you've got to go through the courts. They're going to the schools. So, and just to let me read to you this. This is recent. This just came out 3 weeks ago. This is in our legislature. This is segregation based on skin color alone. Thomas Sowell. It's the only issue. Quote, this is the Vermont legislature's new white affinity space. You had to come to Vermont to hear this kind of stuff. You won't find, we're cutting edge. You know, you talk to people in Massachusetts, they don't know the word BIPOC. Everybody know the word BIPOC? Black and indigenous people of color. It's in your statutes at a legislature near you when you're not too busy trying to make a living. Look at what they're doing. That's why we do the work. VermontLiberty.net, you can subscribe for free. I write articles constantly. I'm quoting the law, I'm quoting the facts. I'm trying to educate people. It's more powerful than money. This is in our legislature in Vermont. Quote, purpose. The white affinity space of the Social Equity Caucus, SEC, is an emergent space. I love these words. What the heck is an emergent? This is an emergent space. Sorry. For white members of the SEC to gather outside regular SEC meetings to work towards dismantling white supremacy culture in our collective and individual work. The white affinity space commits to being transparent and accountable to the Black, Indigenous, and people of color leaders and members of the SEC. In such, SEC Black, Indigenous, and people of color members are welcome to attend, but not expected to attend the white people meetings. Documentation of white affinity meetings will be shared with the SEC and specifically Black, Indigenous, and people of color members in an ongoing and timely manner. The group will develop a list of agreements for participants to read and consent to follow before participating in this space. These are rules for white people to follow to be at the table with Black people. This is critical thinking. And you're not allowed to be at the table unless you first bow and say, I'm so sorry for being white. I'm so sorry for the skin color I was born with. Please, forgive me. It's crap. Sorry, that's the legal term. It's crappus totalis. I made it up. So, you should, so send me an email. Those that are skeptical, yeah, why? Because if it's true, they have to deal with the truth. And it is true. And it is happening. And that's why it's whack-a-mole. They stuck their heads out. We're afraid. We're ahead of the whole country on this. 20 states are banning it. And we're told we're extremists to question it. I think you could tell us why we should be questioning it. But now the second question is, why did our media lie to us? Why for 3 years have we been told we're white supremacist culture without any evidence and a manipulation of statistics? Read Thomas Sowell and watch the movie Uncle Tom. If you haven't seen it, it's on Amazon Prime. It's Black voices talking about the destruction of the Black family by liberals, however well-intentioned, and answer your question, Rick. Many people think this is good, and they don't know how bad it is. We just need to share the facts in truth and love. Sorry.
Two things gonna be quiet. First thing about that, the thought that Black conservatives, Black liberty messages are the ones that will save this nation. I don't necessarily buy that. It's not about your skin color that's going to save this nation, it's about your message. You can do this. This is not a situation where, I'm sorry? I can't hear you.
We have white privilege today.
Well, you got to count. See, when you leverage Frederick Douglass, all that crap comes out of the way. That's what I'm saying. You got to leverage him, and you got to poke yourself with that message of Frederick Douglass. Yeah, if you go use the word Republican conservative, yeah, white privilege. But if you leverage Frederick Douglass, make that part of your life, your testimony, you leverage his stories, his writings, I'm telling you, race comes off the table. So I don't believe it's going to be Black people like myself. It's going to be people like myself who has this message. I wasn't Greek.
I suggest we leverage Kate Carl Smith.
Yeah. Well, I say
his
is,
books and leverage Thomas Sowell.
Yeah.
So there's a place where we all come together. Is that?
that's right. Leverage the liberty message. The other thing is,
She's right too. We do need Black voices. Isn't this refreshing?
Don't you all want that?
We need more.
And I'm gonna say this, about forgiveness, how they say, why you gotta forgive. You gotta tell them you're sorry. Look, forgiveness has to happen on both sides. If it happens on one side, it's not gonna work. Yes, you gotta do it on one side, and the blacks gotta say, please forgive me for judging you and generalizing you that you're a racist. I don't even know you. That has to happen. It can't be just on one side. If it's going to be wholesome, it's going to be real, forgiveness got to happen on both sides. Okay? I'm out of here. You got a question for you, John?
Can I just say one thing? I just wanted to mention, you mentioned Raphael Cruz, and I just wanted to mention a couple of famous Frederick Douglass Republicans. I was on a conference call, nationwide conference call, when Ted Cruz was running for president, and at the very, very end, he said, I very much a Frederick Douglass Republican. I about dropped my teeth because I've been trying to get him to say that for the whole year that he was running. And also, Althea King, who's a very good friend of mine, she considers herself to be a Frederick Douglass Republican. I just wanted to mention that, so you'd be a good company as a Frederick Douglass Republican.
You have one question in the back?
That just by virtue of being a taxpayer?
Yes.
Or, because this form does not imply this. This
So-
form speaks specifically to
Yes, sir. Thank you.
parents and guardians, not taxpayers.
Good question, because this is what we're here to do. We're here to inform and learn. So the question is, how do you use this form to request a copy of the curriculum? These are forms you can take and supply to your local school authority. It may vary depending on your school board. Ask them, who to send it to. They have a duty under the federal statute reference there to provide a lot more detail than just the curriculum for critical race theory to parents. So if you look at the statute, parents have a lot more rights, as you'd expect. But I think as Rick's saying too, gee, as a taxpayer, don't you think I have a right to know anyway? So let them deny you, that's whack-a-mole. I think they still have to provide it, but also bear in mind, as is here, a lot of these materials are available online. So they might say, they'll tell you where it is. So this is intended to let people know they have rights under federal law, and they have the right to ask. And parents, I believe, have more rights, but taxpayers do as well. And thank you all for coming. Please spread the word and find out more. It's great to hear a positive message from Kate Carl Smith. Thank you, Mr. Smith. And Meeting Minor. Thank you.